Okay, good morning. Welcome to another online RE lesson. We're going to be looking today at the next topic in the AQA Islam GCSE unit, which is jihad. So we have looked at the 5 pillars of Islam, and we've looked at how they are important for a Muslim individually, but also important for Muslims collectively as the Ummah. And now we're going to be looking at probably the most misrepresented belief and term and practice within Islam, and that is jihad. So you would have heard the word jihad before, you would have probably seen it in the news or in the media, and it's often associated with violence, terrorism, extremism, death, and destruction. And actually, jihad in itself is not that. It is not what the media often represents it as. Okay, so the overall definition of jihad is very, very different to the one that you'll often see in the news. So I think the first thing to do is to think about what we define jihad is, what you define jihad is, because as I said, you will have heard of it before, and I'm going to try and kind of change some of those misconceptions that we have from the media and from the news about what jihad is. So as part of this lesson, you are going to understand what the word truly means, and you're also going to understand how Muslims can practice jihad in their everyday lives, and that be a very good thing as opposed to a negative thing. So these are some of the pictures that you'd often associate with jihad if you looked at the media. Certainly some of the pictures which you would find if you Googled jihad images. And again, it's a misrepresentation. It is an exaggeration, and it's a falsified version of the term. So we can safely say that that is not jihad. And many Muslims would say that actually anybody who uses violence in the name of Allah is not a Muslim, is not a believer, and therefore cannot be practicing jihad because they themselves are not practicing true Islam. So to actually define what jihad is, I've got it in a very, very simple sentence to begin with. First, I'd like you to write this sentence down, but obviously I would like you to have a look at it and try and fill in the 3 missing words. So it is the blank of Muslims to make blank, and their blank pleasing to Allah. And your 3 missing words are society, themselves, and struggle. So could you just write that sentence down? Make it make sense, so fill in those missing words, and pause the video and come back when you have finished. Okay, so this is what you should have got. Jihad is the struggle of Muslims, and you'll often hear that word a lot over the next sort of few minutes in this lesson, but also when you look at jihad more widely, jihad is referred to as a struggle. Okay, and it's a struggle to do many things, but ultimately it is a struggle of Muslims to make themselves and their society pleasing to Allah. And the reason I've put those in there is I've broken it into the 2 elements of jihad, because on the one hand you have this thing called greater jihad, which is the more important type of jihad. It's the more regular, more common, more everyday type of jihad that would, number one, be like the thing that Muslims focused on most. Okay, so it is the personal inward struggle, there's that word again, of all Muslims to live in line with the teachings of their faith. I want you to write that down. Again, pause this video if you need to, write that phrase down, and then I'm going to explain a little bit more about that later on. Okay, once you've written that first one down, here is the second one, and that is lesser jihad. As the name suggests, it is a little less important, a little less regular, a little less common, a little less widespread than greater jihad. And it is the outward collective struggle to defend the Muslim faith, family, and country from threat. Okay, so on the one hand, greater jihad is about making myself a better person, basically. It is about struggling to improve myself, struggling to make myself kinder, more patient, more gentle, more selfless, more generous, more loving of other people. It is a struggle to fight temptation, to fight greed, to fight anger, all the things that make us unpleasant people. It's a struggle to fight those inside myself. So it's a personal struggle. Lesser jihad is a collective struggle with my Muslim brothers and sisters to defend my faith, to keep my faith alive, and if my faith is under threat or under attack, then to use appropriate means to defend it. Okay, and that is where you do or have historically had a more violent lesser jihad when the Muslim faith was under physical military threat 1,500 years ago. Okay, but that's where that kind of belonged, and doesn't necessarily belong in the modern 21st century today, because Islam is not under the same military threat it has been before. Okay, so that's where you get the confusion sometimes between jihad and terrorism, and jihad and extremism. So greater jihad, myself; lesser jihad, my faith, and that's the main element of it. So I'm going to pick these two apart in a bit more detail. So I'd like you to have in your book a couple of subtitles. First one, greater jihad, and you've obviously got the definition there, but write a new subtitle and leave half a page. We're going to write some notes and do the same for lesser jihad when we get there as well. Okay, there's quite a few notes on this page. I do apologise. I'm going to give you a chance to read them first, so just pause this video, read through the whole information, and then I will start speaking again once you've unpaused it. Okay, so greater jihad is a personal inward struggle of all Muslims to live in line with the teachings of their faith. So what that means is it's about the individual person rather than the collective. So it's a very individual, very personal thing. It's basically, as I mentioned before, it's basically about being a good person. It's about being a person who is pleasing to Allah, and therefore, given that we've just studied them and it's integral to the life of a Muslim, the 5 pillars are a really great example to use as a way of showing greater jihad. Because the 5 pillars within that, you have to declare your faith to Allah, you have to pray daily in order to connect with Him, to center yourself, to purify your soul, to ask for forgiveness. The giving of money in zakah is again a purification of wealth and soul. It is a chance to connect with those in need in society. It's a chance to help people in society, and it's a chance to be less selfish and greedy. You've got the practice of fasting in Ramadan during Sawm, which again is about looking out for those who are less fortunate than oneself, but also to reconnect oneself with God and what really matters, because you're not kind of focusing too much on selfish needs, but you're focusing on God and being thankful for what He has given you in the form of food, safety, security, health, etc. And obviously you've got the pilgrimage to Mecca, which is the ultimate sign of worship and dedication to Allah. So greater jihad, if you were to perform all of the 5 pillars regularly, you would be performing greater jihad, because by virtue of the 5 pillars, you are making yourself a better person. There's also other things such as trying to be less argumentative, trying to be more pleasant. Okay, it's basic 101 stuff about making yourself a better person in line with the teachings of the Quran and the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad. Okay, and that's the basic element of greater jihad. I'm going to move on to lesser jihad, and again there's a few bits on the slide, so give it a minute to read it and then I'll explain them. Okay, so it's really important that you make note of that sentence at the end of the first paragraph. It is largely non-violent. Lesser jihad is not an excuse for violence. Okay, lesser jihad does permit violence in self-defense, but that is simply one element of lesser jihad. Lesser jihad overall is about defending Islam, and that does not have to be in violent means. Okay, it's largely non-violent. I'll come on to that in a second. It's important that you realise that when Muhammad was alive, Muslims were deeply, deeply unpopular in the area they were in, and there was only kind of a small group of people who called themselves Muslims. Islam had not spread to different places, and therefore it was one clan, one group of people, and therefore because that group was under threat, military threat, and they were being persecuted and they were being victimized, because they were under threat, had they been killed, Islam would have been wiped out. And therefore it did permit violent self-defense in order to keep themselves, and by virtue of that their faith, alive. Okay, so that is where the violent element of self-defense comes into play, but that doesn't happen today. We don't see Islam under threat of extinction today, because Islam has spread throughout the globe, it is embedded in society, it is welcomed in society, and therefore it is not under physical military threat. It is under threat from issues of Islamophobia and intolerance and racism and bigotry and Katie Hopkins, you know, it's under threat from those kind of things, but that's not requiring violence. That's requiring a different kind of defense. So not all Muslims will perform lesser jihad all the time, because they don't live in that state of constant, you know, needing to defend. And it's also not as important in many ways as greater jihad. One of the ways which we do see lesser jihad more and more today is this thing called jihad of the pen. Okay, so as it's about defending Islam and protecting people, it's often about speaking or writing in a way which defends Islam, but also in a way which protects people and basically, you know, goes against injustice. There's a saying from the Prophet Muhammad which you could write down now. You also do have it on a sheet on Show My Homework, so you can do either one or you can do both if you want to. But this quote says, "Whoever of you sees something wrong, let him change it with his hand." So that's basically saying if you see evil in the world, do something about it yourself. Try and fix it. If he is not able to, so if you can't do something about it, then with his tongue. So if you can't change it physically, if you can't do something with your hands, speak about it, tell others about it, spread awareness. If he is unable to do that too, then with his heart through prayer. Okay, so you've got three ways of making the world a better place. Number one, do something about it. Number two, speak about it. Number three, if all else fails, pray about it. So Muhammad is giving very practical advice as to how Muslims can use lesser jihad in a way of defending people, defending Islam, and ridding the world of evil in entirely non-violent ways. So an example I've got here is many Muslims joined protests against ISIS when ISIS were at the height of their power in the Middle East. Declaring them enemies of Islam, and etc. etc. There was loads and loads of protests by Muslims who felt it was important for them to make their voices heard. They probably felt they couldn't go and defeat ISIS themselves. That was the kind of do it with your hand element, and therefore the next best thing was to protest about it and go and make your voices heard. We're seeing right now in the Justice for George Floyd movements and the Black Lives Matter and Blackout Tuesday, causes which I'm really passionate about as somebody who wants to try and see equality in the world. We are seeing many Muslims really at the forefront of the Black Lives Matter movement, who are using their voice, who are using social media, who are using protests as a way of standing up against anti-black racism when they see it. And that is as much an element of you know, jihad of the pen as anything else could be. Okay, so it's about defending Islam specifically when Islam is under threat. It is about defending the virtues of Islam, the ethics of Islam, and it is about protecting society as a whole as well. And that can all be done in a non-violent way. Okay. On Show My Homework, you've got a worksheet which has quotes from the Quran and from Muhammad. I would like you to work through that worksheet, and I would like you to choose one task to complete each time. It will be obvious when you see it. There's a green, there's an orange, there's a red task. Choose one of those three and then move on to the next set of three and choose one, and so on and so forth. Okay, you will also see on Show My Homework that you have got a picture task where you've got a sheet that looks like this. And I would like you to explain how any of these symbols, each of these symbols, could link to Muslims performing greater jihad. So what could the symbol represent, and what action could that be that links to greater jihad? Try and link them as much as you can to the 5 pillars. For example, the third one on the top row looks like somebody's praying, and therefore you could say daily prayer, Salah, is an example of greater jihad. Okay, you've got 8 pictures there. I want to see all of your responses for that. So I want you to do those in order, one